Welcome back. If you're into what we're talking about today, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives like this one. Today we're diving into Jordan Peele's Get Out. It's not just your straight horror film, it blends in thriller and some social satire too.
Yeah, you're right. That's what makes it so interesting. Peele makes something really unique. You're entertained, and you end up thinking a lot too about race and society. He does it subtly, but it hits hard.
Right away, we're meeting Chris. He's a black photographer going to visit his white girlfriend's family. On the surface, everything seems cool, but you feel this tension, this weird feeling you can't quite place.
You get that uneasy feeling right away, even though Rose's parents seem so welcoming. It's Peele's use of microaggressions. Those subtle, maybe unintentional bits of discrimination, they create this off feeling. It's like Chris, and the audience too, are on edge, waiting for something to happen.
It's brilliant how he builds suspense. You're never sure if Chris is just overreacting, or if there's something more going on. You have the housekeeper acting strange, guest at the party making odd comments. All these little things add to the sense of dread.
Exactly. Peele doesn't use jump scares or blatant racism. The horror is in the psychology. He makes the audience feel Chris's paranoia, and because it's so gradual, the reveal is shocking and scary.
And speaking of scary, the sunken place. Visually, it's stunning and so disturbing. What do you think Peele's going for with this?
The sunken place is a powerful image. It's about feeling powerless, silenced, like many marginalized groups have felt, Black Americans especially throughout history. Sinking, being trapped where you can't move or speak, that's the trauma of oppression.
It's like having your agency taken away.
Yeah.
You can't control your own life. And the fact that he's hypnotized with just a teacup and spoon? Chilling. It suggests anything can be used to control and manipulate even ordinary things.
Absolutely. Everyday objects representing something much darker, that's Peele. The teacup and spoon are usually about comfort, being welcoming. In the Armitage family's hands, they become weapons. It's a subtle way to show how insidious racism is. It gets into everything, even the most normal points of life.
Chris falling into darkness. It's like a descent into a collective unconscious, where the pain of the past is still alive, still there.
That's an interesting thought. The sunken place could also be about the trauma of slavery, the impact it's had on Black identity. Chris is forced to face the ghosts of the past, generations of pain and suffering.
The use of color in that sequence is interesting too. Those bright reds and blues, it creates this uneasy, disorienting feeling.
Color is important throughout the film. The reds, usually danger and violence, are right next to these cool blues. Blues that can make you feel sadness and isolation. It adds another layer to all the metaphors and allegories Peele's using.
It's like he's made a visual language. It speaks to your subconscious, taps into those basic fears and anxieties we have. You're always on edge, trying to figure out the hidden meanings and symbolism in every shot.
Exactly. Peele uses surrealism masterfully. He blurs what's real and what's a nightmare, keeps the audience guessing, makes them question what they see, like being trapped in a dream where nothing makes sense.
It's this mix of psychological thriller and social commentary. That makes Get Out so compelling. You aren't just watching horror. You're thinking about race, identity, how prejudice can exist, even in places that seem progressive.
You said it perfectly. This film isn't just entertainment. It's a call to action, challenging us to confront our own biases and work to dismantle the systems that make these kinds of horrors happen in the real world.
It reminds us that monsters aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're right there in front of you, looking friendly. It's the things we don't see that are the most dangerous.
Yeah.
Those subtle acts of discrimination, those deep-seated prejudices.
That's a scary thought, but it's something we need to think about. Get Out makes us face the fact that racism isn't just about obvious hatred or bigotry. It's about how power and privilege work to keep inequality going, often without us even realizing it.
And Peele does this while still giving us a genuinely scary and suspenseful horror experience. The tension builds slowly until it explodes in a climax that's both shocking and cathartic. You're left breathless, your mind is racing, trying to understand everything you've just seen.
It's amazing how Peele, as a filmmaker, blends these different things so well. He creates a film that's entertaining and makes you think, disturbing and insightful. It's rare, and it's something to appreciate.
We could go on for hours about all the layers in Get Out. But let's talk about the acting for a minute. Daniel Kaluuya as Chris is incredible. He says so much with just his eyes.
Yeah.
Fear, suspicion, dread.
Kaluuya's performance is subtle and powerful. He embodies that feeling of being trapped, of having your agency and identity taken away. And Allison Williams as Rose, she's just as good. She keeps you guessing about her true motives right until the very end.
The whole cast is great, actually. Lil Rel Howery is Rod, Chris's friend, and Bradley Whitford and Catherine Keener is Rose's parents. They all bring this feeling of uneasiness and dread to the film.
Absolutely. Every character, big or small, adds to this complex story. That's one of the things that makes Get Out so good. It's more than just the individual parts.
It's a film that stays with you, makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about race and privilege, and how prejudice works in our society.
It's a film that demands to be talked about, debated, and analyzed, and it's had a huge impact on the horror genre and beyond.
For our listeners who want to dive deeper into these themes, what other films would you recommend?
Well, if you haven't already, Peele's other films, Us and Nope, they're definitely worth watching. They keep exploring race, class, and the darker sides of American society.
I've heard great things about Us, especially how it explores the idea that we might be our own worst enemies, and how we all have a dark side.
It's unsettling, that's for sure, and full of the same thought-provoking symbolism and social commentary as Get Out.
Beyond Peele, there's the new Candyman. It looks at racial injustice and the power of urban legends.
Candyman shows how horror can unpack historical trauma, how the past haunts the present. And there's His House, which uses horror to look at the refugee experience. Powerful stuff.
It's amazing to see how horror is evolving to address these social issues. It speaks to the power of film to make a difference.
Totally. Horror has always been a mirror reflecting the anxieties of the time. In a world struggling with racism, injustice, and division, it's no surprise we see more horror films tackling these themes.
These films let us process these tough issues in a safe way, to confront our fears and biases. Hopefully we come out understanding ourselves and the world better.
That's what's great about horror. It can be terrifying, but also cathartic. Disturbing, but also insightful. It lets us explore the darkest parts of ourselves and maybe come out with a sense of hope and purpose.
That's a great point. We'll be right back to continue our dive into Get Out.
One thing that really hit me about Get Out is how it plays on our basic fears. The fear of the unknown, of losing control.
It's not just about physical harm, though, right? It's about being totally powerless.
Yeah.
Like a puppet. And that sunken place, the way Peele shows that, is just, wow. It's not just a place, it's a mental state.
Right. Being trapped and silenced, that's what it's about. It's like a nightmare, but you're awake. You know what's happening, but you can't do anything, can't even talk. That fear, it gets to you because it's about feeling marginalized, oppressed, having your voice taken away. It makes us face those anxieties we have about being vulnerable, powerless.
And it's even more disturbing when you realize those anxieties can be used against you, especially when it comes to race and power.
Exactly. The Armitage family wanting to put their minds into Black bodies. It's a scary metaphor for how Black people have been dehumanized and treated like objects. It makes you think about what identity really means. And what happens when someone thinks they can own and control who you are.
It's terrifying. But it also makes you look at how those power dynamics still exist today. Often in subtle ways, you don't always see them.
Get Out uses allegory so well to look at these complex themes, like the deer, for instance. It's not just there for no reason. It represents Chris being vulnerable and also how Black people have been hunted and exploited throughout history.
You're right. It's like foreshadowing. The deer being hunted and killed, it mirrors what's happening to Chris. And then there's the teacup, a symbol of control, especially with Missy Armitage and her hypnosis.
Exactly. Stirring tea, something so normal, becomes something sinister. It's a subtle visual cue. It shows how manipulation can look like kindness.
Like Peele is saying, oppression isn't always obvious. It can be hidden, part of our everyday lives. And the colors he uses add another layer of meaning to these visuals.
You got it. Red and blue, especially in the sunken place. They're not just pretty colors, they mean something. Red, usually danger and violence. Blue, sadness and isolation. They clash and make you feel uneasy, disoriented. It reflects the psychological manipulation that's going on.
It's like he's created a visual language that speaks to your subconscious, triggering our anxieties, making us face those uncomfortable truths we don't want to see.
Peele is a master of surrealism. Blurring what's real and what's a nightmare, that's what makes psychological horror so effective. You're never sure what's true.
And in Get Out, Chris is already feeling paranoid. It makes us question what we're seeing right along with him.
We get pulled into his experience, and that makes it even more effective. It's not just about the horrors of racism. It's also about losing yourself, your identity, even your sense of reality. We all fear that.
This film works on so many levels. No wonder people are still talking about it years later.
And it's important to remember that Get Out doesn't try to give us simple answers. It doesn't tell us how to fix racism or get rid of oppression. It just shows us how it is. holds up a mirror to society. It makes us face these uncomfortable truths and figure out what to do.
It's a call to action, but it also makes you look at yourself. Think about your own biases and assumptions. Are we part of the problem?
That's what makes Get Out so important. It doesn't shy away from the dark stuff. It shows us how cruel we can be, how we manipulate and deceive ourselves. But there's hope, too. When we face these truths, admit that we've been part of the problem, that's when we can start to change things. The film doesn't give us a map, but it gets the conversation started. If we want a better, fairer world, we need to face these things together.
It reminds us that change starts with awareness. Being willing to face the hard truths about ourselves and the world. And sometimes art is the best way to do that. Stories that make us see things differently.
Get Out is a perfect example. It uses horror to say something important about race, identity, and how sneaky prejudice can be. But it's also about hope, about the possibility of change, and how powerful storytelling can be to inspire action.
It reminds us that even in the darkest times, even when things seem scary, we can find redemption. We can heal and build a better future.
It's a powerful message that we need to hear right now.
You're right. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said before about the film being a catalyst for social change. How do you see its impact on horror and beyond?
Get Out was a game changer. It proved horror can be more than just cheap scares. It showed that the genre can talk about serious social issues like race, identity, and power.
It opened the door for other filmmakers to tell these kinds of stories, to use horror to confront the problems we face today.
Exactly, and we see its influence in films that came after, like Us, Candyman, His House. They all deal with social injustice and systemic racism, using horror to amplify those messages, reach a bigger audience.
It's like Get Out gave other filmmakers permission to explore those darker themes, to use horror as a tool for social change.
I like that. It showed that horror can be fun and thought-provoking, that it can reach a wide audience and still push the boundaries of what the genre can do.
And it's not just horror. Get Out has had an effect on other films and TV shows, ones that are dealing with tough social issues in a smart, nuanced way.
Yeah.
They aren't afraid to challenge things.
It shows the power of stories. They can start important conversations and get people thinking about change.
It's amazing how one film can have such a big impact. Not just on a genre, but on culture as a whole. Art can be a powerful force for change. It can challenge our views and make us have those critical conversations we need if we want a fairer world.
Absolutely. And Get Out is a great example of that. It's entertained, scared, and provoked audiences all over the world. It'll be discussed for years to come. Get Out's impact, it's bigger than just, starting a trend of these socially aware horror films. It really hit a nerve.
It did.
This fear of losing control, being manipulated. It's something we all relate to, right?
It is. That's why so many people connected with the film, I think. It wasn't just about race. It was about losing your power, your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And by setting it in America against the backdrop of race, Peele forced us to look at these things in a way we hadn't before.
Yeah, exactly. It started a real conversation nationwide about race and privilege, and it's still going on. People started talking about microaggressions, about allyship that's just for show, the way racism sneaks into everyday life. It was like the film gave us a new language to talk about it all.
It also made people rethink what horror could be. It wasn't about the cheap scares. It was about the horror of realizing the monster could be anyone. Someone you think you know, someone you trust.
That's so true, and it makes it even more disturbing. Because we have to look at ourselves, our own prejudices. Could I be part of the problem, even if I don't realize it?
I think that's why the ending of Get Out feels so good. Chris fights back. He's not going to be a victim. It's powerful. A message of resistance. Taking back your power.
It is hopeful in a way, but it also leaves you feeling uneasy. Because we know the fight isn't over. The film doesn't give us answers, but it pushes us to keep talking about it, keep working for change.
It's a call to action wrapped up in a horror movie. That's the legacy of Get Out, I think. It changed how we talk about race, how we think about horror, and how we see the world.
It's a film that's going to stay relevant. It's proof of how storytelling can change things, how it can give us hope.
That's a great point. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Get Out. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell your friends about the show. Keep exploring these ideas, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.